Welcome everyone to True Scary Stories. This one is called Welcome to the Neighborhood. I grew up an army brat. My family never planted roots. The toughest move occurred the summer before my sophomore year of high school. I wasn't interested in new friends. Teenagers were already in cliques, but I was used to the drill. My father moved ahead of us to rent a house. I had no say as usual. It made no difference. The place he chose was beyond my wildest imagination. It was 3 stories and contained a labyrinth of rooms and hallways. My bedroom was on the top floor and twice its previous size. I could turn the finished basement into the ultimate rec room. The house sat on an acre of property along Rural Road 9. A large pond and an abandoned church with a requisite graveyard comprised the neighborhood. A thick forest bordered our backyard. We were a mile in any direction of another living soul. I was arranging my bedroom late my first night when sounds began emanating behind the house. I opened the window to determine its source and heard various howls and wails coming from the forest. I contemplated waking my parents, but found a flashlight and walked onto the back porch instead. I shined the light on the trees, but it wasn't powerful enough to reveal their secrets. I summoned the courage to investigate further and walked towards the woods. As eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes hunted at night, I kept the ground illuminated. Halfway to the forest, the sound stopped, as I did. The tiny hairs on my neck rose in response to my fear. I felt someone, or something, had noticed my presence. A twig snapped at the forest's edge. I looked to see several pairs of eyeshine. I swore I heard footsteps racing to catch me as I sprinted to the back door. The howls and wails recommenced after the door shut behind me. They sounded closer this time, but dissipated within the hour. I described what happened to my parents over breakfast. My father said the real estate agent warned him about local kids throwing parties in the woods. The explanation didn't correspond with my experience, though. I explored the pond after dinner, spotting frogs, turtles, and a rat snake. Curiosity getting the better of me, I abandoned the reptiles to search for the source of the previous night's excitement. I hesitated upon arriving at the forest's front door, but entered unannounced as daylight made for a less intimidating atmosphere. I stumbled across a makeshift fire pit 50 yards from our property line. It appeared last night's fright was a prank pulled by the town's teenagers. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued my trek deeper into the woods. Several large fallen trees inspired my investigation. Their uprooting created enormous pits. Beds of tree branches and leaves lay on the floor, an obvious sign that animals used them as dens. I came across the largest hole near dusk and attempted to comprehend the wind needed to topple such an immense tree, especially since it was deep in the forest and thus well guarded from violent gusts. A mat of leaves and branches again sheathed the bottom. This pit, however, also contained a variety of sizable animal skeletons. I climbed into the pit and examined the bones. Sun-bleached, they appeared to be chewed from all the nicks and scratches I observed. I also found clumps of silver-gray hair upon inspection of the bedding. I picked up a few strands off a branch and rubbed them between my thumb and index finger. The fibers were thick and coarse. I brought them to my nose and gagged from the offensive odor. The caw of a nearby crow broke my concentration. I realized dusk had arrived, so, wanting to be home by nightfall, I placed my hands on the pit's rim and climbed out. A large footprint caught my eye as I brushed the dirt off my pants. I could not discern the creature who made it, but it gave me the creeps. I heard a loud knock in front of me, like a tree's trunk being struck by a large stone. The sound beckoned my gaze to the place from which it came. A second, louder knock came from my left. I wondered if some local teenagers were again having fun at my expense. Upon hearing a howl, I took off for home. I tore through the forest's obstacle course, zigzagging around tree trunks, vaulting over rotting logs, and ducking under serrated branches. The knocking surrounded me, gaining ground with every step I took. I wanted to stop, turn around, and face my tormentors, but couldn't. Since my body was close to either collapsing or being overtaken, I dove into a thick patch of ferns, hoping to camouflage myself. I tried remaining quiet while my lungs gasped for breath. My surroundings came into focus as I calmed down. Heavy footsteps compressed the forest floor. I didn't dare pop my head up to see who it was. I prayed the cover of darkness would hurry and hide me for good. 3 different pairs of steps converged upon me as the sun blinked below the horizon. I heard raspy breathing and smelled a familiar gag-inducing odor as I trembled. Though darkness had enveloped the foliage, I closed my eyes to avoid witnessing what would seal my fate. They were all within 10 feet of me. 3 separate finger-like touches slid over me, against my arms, over my back, and across my legs. I wondered if they were examining me like I examined the bones in the burrow. I wondered if I would end up as another sun-bleached skeleton in the pit. A fierce rattle rose from the surrounding underbrush. To my amazement, the slithering caresses were not my pursuers, but a trident of eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes. Lucky for me, my unwitting venomous protectors felt as threatened as I did. The 3 pairs of footsteps receded into the forest, carrying their wails and howls with them. Time passed and the snakes stopped rattling. I stood up and fled home. We lived in the house for another year before they transferred my father. I never ventured beyond my backyard again. I'm still not sure what happened that evening in the forest. Despite my initial reluctance, I ended up making friends at the local high school that year. I asked them if they ever partied in the woods behind our place. Until last summer, they said. Then something chased us out. What was it, I asked. Don't know, they said. We never saw them.